Good evening. Good to see you. It's been a while. Maybe this time last year, I can't remember. And believe it or not, for those of you who have been here for 5 years or longer, which is when I first arrived to North Georgia / Chattanooga, it's been 5 years. So this was the first place that Sarah and I landed before we landed over at Highway 27, and I think they call it Lafette. I haven't figured that out yet. I don't know why, but I know that that's the way that they say it. So Lafayette, or whatever. That place over there that we love so much. So it's been 5 years. So that was quick. It seems really not that long ago that I remember coming in very quietly and sitting there at the very back and seeing all of you and getting to meet all of you, at least most of you anyway. And there's, of course, some new faces. So really good to be here. Thank you for having me. I am certainly appreciative that you've invited me here to speak now on a few different occasions. And tonight we're going to be looking at sowing support, and I guess it's the final series, or the final lesson in this series, which is, exciting in one sense, because now you kind of get to put a button on things and a bookend on the whole thing, and kind of sad in another sense, because these are always great. These are always great to have these lessons that are focused on very specific things, and having different people come and give their variety of perspectives and things like that. So we'll try and do the best that we can to put a nice bow on it for you. I'm not good at wrapping gifts. Sarah's the gift wrapper, but nonetheless, I will do my best here for you this evening. And when we talk about sowing support, and Byron told me I can go whatever direction I wanted with this, which is really kind of dangerous. But I think I picked the direction that I hope will be useful to you. We're really going to be talking about, when I think about support, I think about a few different things. And I thought about a few different ways we could take it. And I felt like the best way that I could take it tonight, and of course including the context of what's in 1 Corinthians 13, which if you're not there yet, go ahead. In 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 7. When we think about verse 7 and we look at love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things, and we're looking at really love bearing all things and enduring all things. I mean, that is definitely support. And when I think about how to accomplish that for a group of Christians, I think about fellowship. I coach, for those of you that don't know, I coach the soccer teams at Dalton State. And it's my 10th season. It's my 5th year there as the head coach, but it's my 10th season overall as a head coach. So I've built many teams, and team dynamics are something that I'm very interested in. I actually teach a course. I taught several courses at Florida College, and I actually even teach a course here now for a few years on leadership and coaching. And pretty much all of it's the same. It's team dynamics, and all of it's, by the way, if you do it the right way, in my opinion, it's just biblical values. Take biblical values and put them in your environment, and it works. And I think that the church is you look at the pattern of the church and you try and emulate that in your environment. What do we see? Well, we can look at Acts 2, of course. We have this account for us in verse 42. They continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship and breaking of bread and in prayers. And when I think about support, I think about team dynamics, of course, because that's what I think we essentially are, is we're on God's team, right? And we all have our different roles, just like a team would. How do you best support each other? There's a lot that I could say about that, but I think I'm very safe, and that's not a pun, but I think I'm very safe in saying this. That worked out good. I wasn't playing. That's not in my notes. That one's for free. That one's for free. But I think your ability to support each other is completely dependent on your ability to relate to each other, to love each other, spend time with each other. In other words, the fellowship. I think if the fellowship is good, then you will support each other. I think if it's not, then you might support each other, but maybe at varying levels. Think about it this way. The people that you support the most in your life, do they happen to be the people that you know the best? Probably. Right? Probably. And then you might support people that you don't know super well, but maybe at a lower level than you would the people that you know the best. Okay, well, how do we get to know people? Well, we fellowship, right? And now we can give the invitation and we can go on. But that's basically the point. I think today churches, and it's been I think 13, 14 years since I've obeyed the gospel and converted out of Islam, and I find it fascinating to look at the Lord's church and learn about the Lord's church. And what is the Lord's church? Well, it's Christians, right? So I find it fascinating to look at Christians, all of us, and try and take an interest in looking at the Bible and seeing like, well, how are we doing when it comes to these things? And I think the churches have done a really good job of taking the things that we probably consider most important, which would be like our meeting and our observance of the Lord's Supper and our praying prayers and our songs, et cetera, et cetera. I think like we've done a really good job of nailing that down. Like we've got an order for it. People do it really well. People spend time preparing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that all of those things importance has been placed upon it. You hear lessons about it all the time, how important these things are, and it's been done, and it's been done well. But what about fellowship? Do we understand fellowship and support? Do we understand that the level that the Lord wants us to understand that? Because who cares what we really think about it? Like, what does the Lord think about it? Do we understand at the level that He thinks is what's important? I think that's one of the questions that we have to ask tonight. Are we practicing it in a way that would be consistent with the early church, which is the other question that we have to ask tonight, because that's kind of our thing, right? My sister-in-law was just here for Christmas, and she was like, hey, she came to church with us, and she's Catholic, and she's like, hey, tell me about the Church of Christ of the New Testament, and we try and stick as closely to that as we can. That's kind of if you wanted to package it in like a sentence, that's what we do, right? It's what we tell people. Well, when it comes to fellowship, do we look at the New Testament and keep as close to that pattern as we can? And of course, the answer, we all have to answer that for ourselves. Because especially when it comes to fellowship, this is very much a individual thing. Sometimes the group will get together, right? But it's very individualized. And in this lesson, I want to examine that. I want to examine fellowship a little bit more closely with this idea in mind that we have in 1 Corinthians 7 of love bears all things and endures all things. Does our support endure all things? Does our support and our love for one another endure and bear all things? That's the question. That is the question. What are all of those things? We'll get to them in a little bit. But I want to stay on this kind of idea about what the church has maybe, I don't want to say been lacking necessarily, because it's each congregation's different. Some churches aren't lacking at all in fellowship, and some might be lacking only maybe a little bit, and some might be lacking a lot, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, I've not been here enough to know exactly where things lie here. But as it manifests, the way that it manifests in local churches, I think, this kind of problem with fellowship is kind of a problem of self-centeredness, which, by the way, I'm not like trying to step on any toes or anything. I probably will, because that always ends up happening. But it's hard not to be self-centered. I'm going to tell you something I tell my players all the time. I tell them the same thing. They're like, "What do you mean it's not hard to? It's hard to not be self-centered." Well, it is. Like, well, no, I'm a very selfless person. Like, okay, well, good. Think about it this way: whose phone, like your phone, who does it belong to? You. When people dial it, who are they calling? You. When you get dressed in the morning, who do you look at? You. When you buy clothes, who are you getting them for? You. Well, I buy clothes for other people. Okay, well, when you get dressed, you're putting them on you, unless it's your baby. So I'm not saying this is like an inherently bad thing. I think our world, who's your credit score belong to? You. Like, who does the car dealership want you to sign on the loan? Like, they want your, whoever to sign on the loan. They want you to sign on the loan. They want you to make the payment, right? They want somebody to make it. So my point is that our world is kind of set up to where it's like, I've got my things. Like, I've got to do this. I've got to look at your schedules, look at your calendars. Look at your responsibilities at work. You don't get to shirk them off. You have to do them. So I'm not saying like the problem of self-centeredness is inherently us being malicious. I just think that that's the world that we live in, and definitely the country that we live in. Like it's like BK, have it your way. Like people are advertising to cater to you all the time. So the idea that this could creep into the church is like, this is not very far-fetched. I think it's probably a high likelihood that it would creep into the church. because the church is made up of Christians. So if an observer were to come and make a careful analysis of the life in the church, of any church, Highway 27 here or any other place, what would they find if they were looking for fellowship? Maybe someone who is a specialist, and like I said, maybe like team dynamics or how a group works together, which is essentially team dynamics. They would probably, on your own mind, do these things exist and how well do they exist, at what level they exist, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody that would come in to try and observe the fellowship in a church would probably be looking for how we relate to one another at our assemblies. They'd probably be looking for how we interact or relate to one another outside of our assembling. So our assembling would be one. They would also maybe want to see how we interact outside of here. What are our group loyalties look like? You know, the slang cliques, you know, where are the cliques? You know, you see the people standing over here, standing over here, standing over here. Where do people sit? Where do they congregate out in the parking lot? Who goes to lunch with who, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Our willingness to support each other in a time of need. So when someone's going through something, like when you rattle off the announcements and like someone's going through something, who are the people that get prayed after? Maybe people that you would pray for, like if you're out to lunch. There's sometimes, you know, like you put someone, even when you're praying for your food, you might even say something about someone who's going through something difficult in your prayer. So like if somebody were to come in and observe the group, I would think that they would maybe pay attention to something like that. I'm telling you what I would pay attention to. If I wanted to make it less personal, if I was going to observe another team, these would be some of the things that I would be looking for. And of course, the amount of time that we spend with each other outside of church versus inside, which inside of church is really easy to calculate because you got to be here a certain amount of times for, you know, a week in a certain period of time. But what about outside? You know, 4 hours a week in here versus 0 hours a week out there, or 1 hour a week out there, et cetera, et cetera. And their whole point is that they're trying to learn, like who knows who, and what do they know about them. If someone were to come in and examine the group here or Highway 27, I think the question that we have to ask is, like, what would we expect them to discover if this was the list that they said they were coming to look at? I think that's maybe a good way to kind of summarize this idea of sowing support. Like if we're going to sow support, then these are probably the things that somebody would be looking for. I'll give you some more questions to consider. Even in a team, but certainly, you just think about like your own group, and then, you know, either the lesson makes sense here or it doesn't. But one of the questions that I would ask myself, and I've asked myself this: do I know the majority of the names of the members in the church? It's like, yeah, I know everybody's name here. So not everybody knows everybody's name. Do you know everybody's first and last name? You know, that might be a little bit more challenging. Do we know what people do for a living? Do you know only what half the people do for a living? Do you know what a quarter of them do for a living, 75%, or all of them? Do you know what their hobbies are? You probably know what teams they support, right? Yeah, fair enough. That's important. I support Arsenal. There you go. I don't know, Richard, if that landed for you or not, but hopefully you're not a Man United fan, but I'm just kidding. So yeah, I mean, do we know what teams they support? Probably, because that's what we post on Facebook. That, you know, go, I don't know who it is up here. Is it Tennessee? Is it the Volunteers? All over, Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, you know, the whole mix. Dalton State, of course. That was a given. Or do we only know the surface level of people? Do we know where people are from? Do we know where they were maybe before this? Or what brought them here to this area? Maybe where they were born? Or do we express actually very little interest in the things that actually make a team? The thing that actually makes you want to support somebody? Do we only come to worship for our own spiritual life and our own personal salvation? I'm afraid, and again, this might be a little bit harsh, but I'm not saying this is true of congregations. I'm just telling you I'm afraid of it. I'm afraid that sometimes going to church is like going to a movie theater or going to a football game. It's like you're there. How many of you have been to a sporting event? Hopefully several of you. And hopefully all of us have been to a movie theater that's been maybe like reasonably packed, like at least 50%. Imagine being in the stands of a football game or a proper football game, and there's, 50,000 people there. It's like you don't know anybody there other than your group of four. Church can't be that way. The movie theater, like the movie theater, I get it. You go with your family and like maybe another family, maybe like you ran into somebody there, small town, like, oh, hey, they're the Smiths or whatever, and good to see you. How are your kids or whatever? How was your Christmas? And then you watch the movie and like you don't know everybody else. It can't be like that here. It can't even remotely resemble that here. And this is, how do I know this? Well, again, Acts chapter 2 is I think, a great example. Just look at your New Testament. So the bottom line is, if we can't answer some of these questions in some amount of depth, then the level of support that we're giving each other, it might exist, right? The level of support that we have might exist, but it might not be the type of support that the Lord is asking us to give, because that's the standard. Again, who cares what I think? If the Lord's going to put his life down for the brethren, he says the one that loves the other is the one that lays his life down for the brethren. That's the highest bar that you're going to get. So then the standard that he's asking for is a big one. So again, I'm not suggesting that exists here or that exists at Highway 27. It's something, however, that is in our society, in our age of information. And again, it's not even malicious. Like, we're in the age of information. What are you doing when you're away from here? You're on your phone. We even get notifications for how much screen time you get now. Like last week you had this much screen time and it was up 5% or it was down 20% or whatever. And you're trying to think of, what was I doing that made me down 20%? Did I read a book or something? That's crazy. We're in the age of information. Our access to information has increased, but our desires and our outcomes then of spending time with each other can very easily decrease. Which one of you still goes to people's houses and knocks on the door? Nobody does that anymore. Do you remember that? You remember when you used to be able to go to someone's house and you just get a knock at the door? Like, oh, hey, it's you, come in. I know you come by, cool, what's up? And maybe make them some coffee or whatever, and you sit down. And that was like the 90s. That's what you did. You didn't get a page that you were going to, someone's paging you that they're going to come over or whatever. That's not the way that it worked. People just dropped in. Remember when you had a telephone in your house and you used to have to pick it up off the hook? Like, society has changed so much that these little things that used to force us to interact, they don't exist anymore. I just have to, it's like, well, a phone call, Safe, is not an interaction. I tell you what, it's different than me texting you. Definitely. And then when it was hooked to a cord, you couldn't go anywhere, so phone calls were a little more like direct. Here you go, and then I'll see you in a little bit so I can get off this phone and do what I was doing. So again, the purpose of the study then is to try and bring this awareness to learn how we can support each other the best that we can. And I believe that fellowship, a strong cord of fellowship, will indeed be the foundation of the support that we need to then support each other to bear all things and endure all things. So as we continue, what type of fellowship are we talking about? Has to be a fellowship that is accepting. I'm going to give you just a couple things here that I think will make sense, and then we'll move on. But it has to be a fellowship that's accepting. I think the nature of our fellowship could be patterned after a family. Now, I get it. You might not have a family that's very tight-knit, but hopefully you will have either come from a family that is somewhat tight-knit, or at least been around a family that's tight-knit, so all of this will make sense, or have been part of a group that will be really tight-knit. But I think a tight-knit household is a great comparison to what the church here should look like. What do I mean by that? One where everybody is actually, truly interdependent on one another. As in, if somebody no longer comes and attends here, like, it actually affects you. Not you could take it or leave it whether they're here or not. You could take it or leave it whether they're sick or not and couldn't make it that Sunday. Like a place where it actually affects you. So like and I can tell you right now, in my home now, I can use that as a great example. If Sarah is sick, like, you want to talk about truly interdependent, I can't run that place. Maybe an hour. Maybe an hour. If I have to be with my kids and provide everything that they need for over an hour, like, I start to get a little bit overwhelmed. Like, I can't run that place without her. Well, my home growing up was somewhat similar in some ways, that if someone wasn't there, if someone went out of town, I imagine it's similar when I go out of town for work. It's not the same in our house. Okay, well then, we can start to think then that this place should maybe resemble that to a degree. The type of fellowship that should be in the church and the types of support that we have should be one that's accepting of the way that it is for like a family. I know that's maybe easy, you might say. In a family, it's like, yeah, but you're tied by blood. You know, it's safe, it's different. Well, in the church, it's not always easy. I get that. You have a gathering of various peoples from various backgrounds and various lifestyles, et cetera, et cetera. But in the home, I'm sure all of you, and maybe even, especially with the timing of Christmas, maybe you just went through like a really dramatic family time where it was maybe it was almost a relief, right, to either leave their house or to see them go or whatever. Not in a bad way, not trying to be, rude or anything, but it can be chaotic depending on what your family is like, right? So sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. But I have to say, if we're going to say that we're tied by the blood that is in our veins, and that's what makes a family, I mean, that is diabolically opposed to what Christ did on the cross. So I don't think that will stand up to any level of scrutiny from the New Testament. So how can a thriving fellowship of support exist in the midst of the differences that we might have if we're not blood related? And there are a lot of differences. There are differences in race, there are differences in nationalities, political ideologies, economic status, lifestyles, secular interests, the teams that you support and your hobbies that you have, your spiritual maturity. You have some people who are new in the faith and maybe, babes in Christ, right? And you have some people who are very experienced. And then you have some people who've been maybe a Christian a long time, but they're a little bit weaker and they're struggling, and some that have been a Christian for a certain amount of time and they're really strong in the faith, et cetera, et cetera. You have a variety of differences inside of a group. Like, how on earth are we supposed to have the support and fellowship when there's maybe more in some ways, at least in quantity, that separates us and divides us? Like, how are you supposed to hang it all then? I'll give you an example. I'll use myself. I'm brown. I'm not born in this country. I was not raised in the church. I was not raised a Christian. I like soccer. Okay, that definitely starts to separate you in a crowd. Like, I coach soccer. I preach. I just named, 7 things that, how many of you can relate to, directly relate to any of those 7? Maybe like 1 or 2, maybe? No, how are we supposed to get along? And how are we supposed to show support to each other? I guess we can't support each other then. Like, it's silly, right? We have to be able to support each other, despite all of these differences. And I get it that these differences possess the capacity to allow for disruptions. How is that possible? Well, who am I likely to hang out with based on the things that I just told you? And this is just human beings, and I can just pick on myself because it's easier. Well, maybe foreigners, maybe people that didn't grow up in the church. What about people that like soccer? It's easier for me to group up with them. And there are some in our church, right, that they keep up with Dalton State like regularly. They're like, hey, great win last night, or whatever. And so it'd be easy for me to this is what's going on, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it's work to go outside of these things that bind you in some other ways. But these cliques develop because of that. So what's the answer? Again, it lies in our attitude. It lies in our ability to be accepting. It lies in our ability to understand that God shows no partiality. Chapter 2. I'll pick up in verse 9 just to give some of the context. In verse 9 of Romans chapter 2, there will be tribulation and distress for every human being who does evil, the Jew first and also the Greek, but glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, the Jew first and also the Greek. For God shows no partiality. That is one of the most unequivocally clear statements in the New Testament. For God shows no partiality. Like, it's about as straightforward as it gets. If God's not going to show partiality, I shudder at for the words to even come out of my mouth that I'm about to say. If God shows no partiality, how on earth could we show any partiality? Any time that I've ever shown partiality, and that I will show partiality, I'm embarrassed when it happened before, and I'm already embarrassed that it's going to happen again. Embarrassed is a really nice way of saying it. It's actually completely unacceptable. That's the truth. It's completely unacceptable. For me to look at somebody and say, well, they just don't get it because they're not Arabic. And let me tell you, in this time of life, which, there's been a variety of times of this life, but that's a different story for maybe later. But it's really easy for me to say that. It's really easy. They just don't get it. Forget them. They just don't get it. They just don't understand. That's unacceptable. Certainly amongst brethren. Certainly amongst brethren. It's unacceptable. So we have to have this tight-knit household here. Consider the way that Jesus would have looked at these things. Jesus viewed family as the ones who did the will of the Father. This one, I love this in Matthew 12. In Matthew chapter 12, and verse 46. I don't know how often we read this one, but you should mark this one. This is good. I really, this resonated with me. In Matthew 12 and verse 46, while he was still speaking to the people, behold, his mother and his brothers stood outside asking to speak to him. But he replied to the man who told him, who is my mother and who are my brothers? And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Your family is whoever does the will of the Father, not the person that's tied to you by blood. This is the way that Jesus viewed it. So then there you go. My thoughts then they should just follow. And I should just imitate that. That's what we should be doing. Jesus and his apostles used this idea of family all the time. Speaking to God as Father, then pray like this, our Father who art in heaven. Jesus is telling you, call him Father. Don't just call him God, call him Father. That's wild. Think about that. The first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega, the creator of all things, the giver of all good things, the all-knowing, all-powerful, ever-present God is your Father. Okay. I want to close my laptop and be done. It's like nothing else to say almost at that point. Because it's just when you say that, I'm just dumbfounded myself. I'm struck. I'm like, how? It's amazing. It's amazing. The apostles called the church the brotherhood and the family of God. The church. And they're not like speaking about, they're speaking about that one church. Speaking about that one church. They're talking about that one church back then. He's talking about the church. He's talking about us, the Christians. And so the church that was established by Jesus was supposed to be a tight-knit household, allowing for the type of closeness that would allow us to support each other, to bear all things and endure all things. Because if that's the type of closeness we're going to have, then it just doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter what your political ideology are, doesn't matter what team you support, doesn't matter what you did, what mistake you made, I'm going to support you, we're going to figure things out, and I'm going to be there. That's what that's supposed to mean. And that's what Jesus did. Clearly. Jesus did not die for a bunch of people who are a bunch of good folks doing the right thing. So then, what else can we accomplish? What else can we do to accomplish this in our relationship with each other? I just preached on this, so I'll give you the short and skinny of it. In Matthew chapter 18, we need to be like children. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, in verse 1 of Matthew 18, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So instead of us looking to have dominance over one another or compare each other, maybe compare what my line of work is to yours, or compare where I live to yours, or where I'm from to where you're from, or what church I go to what church you go to, or whatever. Maybe we should be looking at this as an example of basically the disciples doing something like this, and Jesus saying, you guys are missing the point. Bring me that kid over here. He's the greatest. And you're like, that kid can't wipe his nose. It's like, That's the point. That's the point. They're completely dependent on Jesus. So instead of looking to compare ourselves, we should have humility and show a submissiveness to one another. I tell you, that's one of the biggest things, the biggest lessons that I've ever taught a young person coaching is stop comparing yourself to somebody else. Coach, what do I need to do to get some more time, some more playing time? Because that's what it's all about, right? It's all about the playing time. I think that I'm better than so-and-so, or I think I'm getting closer to this person in some ways. And I'm like, stop looking at other people. Stop. When the disciples did that, Jesus brought a child in the midst of them. It's like, I wish I had a child that I could bring at that time, like into the office and be like, this kid right here. Like, he doesn't care about that. So not just looking at our relationship with each other, but our concern for each other. We should be concerned with protecting the members of our family. We should be concerned with supporting the members of the church. Not just supporting the people in your clique, not just supporting the people in your blood relative family, supporting everybody. Imagine that for a second. Seriously, imagine that. Like, who in the building are you not prepared to support? Then you need to be prepared to support that person. We have got to be concerned with the one who maybe strays, with the one who's having a hard time, with the one who's not having a hard time, because they will have a hard time. You know, you're always in three phases, right? You're either having just come out of some adversity, in the midst of adversity, or about to go into adversity. So everybody needs support. It doesn't matter how strong and big and whatever they faithful they look like. Everybody's going to need it. And then, of course, forgiving one another. I have to say, this has been one of the biggest planks in the eye that I've seen in being a member of the Lord's church. I've known people who are there every Sunday, and thankfully I don't know any currently, but I've known before people that are there every Sunday, and like there's 2, 3, 4, 5 people in the congregation can't stand each other. It is unbelievably wild to me. Do we show enough support in forgiving? How can we show support if we're not willing to forgive? The answer is you can't. It's actually really simple. And then in our service to one another. Jesus served us, so of course we're to serve everyone else. So then we got some work to do, right? We got some work to do. I think that all of these things are emphasizing a spiritual truth, a spiritual certainty. The church is supposed to be your greatest support. The church is not supposed to be your auxiliary support, or in other words, your supplemental support. This is not your supplemental insurance. Like, this is it. The people in this building are supposed to be it. The people in this building are supposed to be everything. Like, this is your support. It's not like you come here and you get, it used to be that way, right? You come in on a Wednesday and it's like, man, you're glad you made it to a Wednesday. You can get a little bit of an uplift, and then you got to try and grind through the rest of your week and go get your support from wherever else. It's like, this is your support. Everything else is a supplement. You can have support outside of this. That should be your auxiliary. This should be the greatest source of love and fellowship and support and kindness. This is it. So yeah, we got some work to do. We may need to spend more time with each other. For some, it might be being more faithful to come to services so that you can be seen and loved and supported. For others, it might be maybe widening our circle of influence. Maybe you're pretty attached to a group and you know everybody, but maybe you're not spending enough time with these other people. So maybe it's widening your circle of influence and giving more of your time to other people. I think for all of us, it definitely means being more willing to become involved with the concerns of others. Like, I can't support you if I don't know what's going on. We need to become more involved in the work. What does the church family do? Save souls, restore those who are erring in the way, and edify the ones who are saved. Maybe we need to just get more involved in that work. And naturally, then we will be able to support each other. So then my final appeal, I've got some things that maybe you can consider. Have a heart of compassion, not a heart of ice. Be kind, not cruel. Be humble, not proud. Be gentle, not harsh. Patient, not intolerant. Forgiving, not judgmental. And loving and not bigoted. You want to show support? Fundamentally, it's probably the easiest lesson to ever preach. And practically, one of the hardest lessons to put into practice. Some of it's our fault, and again, some of it's just our society. But I think that we can commit to working harder at giving the proper support that God will want us to have for each and one of us. If becoming a child of God is not something that you've done, I can tell you that's a level of support that has to exist. Allow God to support you. You know, I'd love to be there for you. And by the way, I will. Everybody here can get in contact with me pretty easily. I don't make myself very difficult to find about anything. I might be good at helping you. I might not. I might be really bad at helping you. I don't know, but I'm willing. I can tell you, me and a million people can't help you the way that God can. If you're not a child of God, please consider that tonight. Consider allowing the God of everything to support you and by obeying the gospel. If you have that need, come forward as we stand and sing.